Good day, my friends. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Daily Torah broadcast, a ministry of the Messianic Discipleship Institute. Remember, you can always visit us online at mymdi.org and download previous episodes of the Daily Torah podcast. If you're not a Daily Torah channel subscriber, click the subscribe button so you never miss a single episode. Also, feel free to leave comments and let us know what you're learning so far. Today, we continue our special Daily Torah series on God's plan for humanity, leading up to the fall holy days and ending with the beginning of the new Torah cycle that begins after the last great day of the Feast of Tabernacles. So, my friends, enjoy this series and have a blessed holy day season. Good day, my friends. Welcome to the Daily Torah broadcast, a ministry of the Messianic Discipleship Institute. Today we are in part 4 of our series on God's plan for humanity. We have a lot to cover, so let's get right into it. Yesterday we reviewed the first of God's holy days mentioned in Leviticus 23 verse 1. Let's review. In Leviticus 23 verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, the feasts of the Lord which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work on it. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings." Then we reviewed how the Sabbath day is so vitally important to God and was created for our good, that he loves us so much he even made it a part of the 10 Commandments. On the 4th commandment it says, "Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he hallowed it." He made it holy. Well, today we're going to go deep into the Sabbath and discuss which day is the Christian Sabbath and how did it change from Saturday to Sunday. As I mentioned in our last episode, the word Sabbath is found 155 times in the Bible, 59 times in the New Testament. Jesus kept the Sabbath, and so did all the apostles and early believers. After the resurrection, even until today, many Christian believers keep the Sabbath today. Seventh-day Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists, many offshoots of the Worldwide Church of God, and Messianic Jewish believers, and probably others that I'm not even aware of. So what happened? How and why did a joyous holy day given to us by the Creator and instructed to us to remember it and was put in as part of the 10 Commandments, how did it change from the God-given day to another day? As I mentioned in past episode, man does not have the authority to change what God has ordained, yet this is exactly what has happened. How did this happen? Well, let's begin to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And we can start in Matthew 12, verse 1, and listen to what Jesus, Yeshua himself, said. In Matthew 12, starting in verse 1, it says, "At that time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, 'Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." But he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this means, 'I desire mercy and not sacrifice,' you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." So friends, here we have the beginning of one of two controversies that we're going to get into in the next few segments. And they're perpetrated by the hearts of man, and later they're magnified by the evil one to bring about division and persecution, for no other purpose but to stop the plan of God for all humanity. But God, as we shall see, in his ultimate wisdom, has turned the tables on Hasatan, Satan, the devil, that dragon of old, who has caused so much destruction in the world, that God, in his wisdom, made it so that the gospel was to spread and to flourish all around the world. But now God is calling us all back to the Garden of Eden, back to the time when he walked amongst his children, back to the time when all will be restored, and his Son, Jesus, Yeshua the Messiah, is the path. Remember I said yesterday that he said, "Come to me, follow me." He is the door back to that time of restoration. And so this first controversy was created by the Pharisees, really in an act of nobleness on their part, but in reality became a yoke around the necks of the Jewish people living in the land at the time of Jesus. You see, my friend, we must know our Bible history to be able to understand what is being said here and what the conditions were at this time. You see, during this time, the Romans occupied and they controlled the Holy Land. But before the Romans, during the time of Jesus, they were controlled by the Greeks. And the Greeks set up what was called Hellenism as their religion. And so during this Hellenistic period, which covers around the time of the death of Alexander the Great, in 323 BC, in the emergence of the Roman Empire as signified by the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, which is right before the time of the birth of Yeshua, about 35 years before. So during this big conflict, a few hundred years, really it started before Yeshua was born, Hellenism came up from Greece. Now let's go into this a little bit. The ancient Greek word Hellas, Hellas, is the original word for Greece, from which the word Hellenistic was derived. And under the Hellenistic kingdoms, Judea was ruled by the office of the high priest of Israel as a Hellenistic vassal. In this period saw the rise of Hellenistic Judaism, which first developed in the Jewish diaspora of Alexandria and Antioch and then spread to Judea. Now I'll go through some of the history of how this happened in other segments, but during this time the Jews had come back from captivity and they rebuilt the temple, and now the Greeks occupied the area there. And so during this time, the Septuagint translation of the Hebrew Bible from biblical Hebrew to Greek was written. And it was during this time that many wars between fractioning entities, because the Greek Empire was deteriorating, the Roman Empire was starting to raise its muscle, and so there was all these wars going on and these battles. And it was during this time that Antiochus or Antiochus Epiphanes sacked Jerusalem and looted the temple in 169 BC. And during this time, he banned key Jewish religious rites and traditions in the land. And this is all recorded in the works of Josephus, in Philo, but more importantly, it's contained in great detail in the books of the Maccabees. And that's part of the Apocrypha. Sometimes your Bible will have that. Some Bibles do not have it. If you have like the Oxford Bible, even your Catholic Bible has the Apocrypha in it and in the accounts of the Maccabees. And it was during this time that Epiphanes, he was so brutal during this time that he outlawed the Torah. And he outlawed keeping the Sabbath. And he outlawed eating kosher food, which is covered in Leviticus 11, and outlawed circumcision. And mothers and babies were routinely put to death, as well as whole families who tried to keep the Torah and God's commandments. It was an awful time. Well, let's review. Let's turn to the book of Maccabees and let's see exactly some of the things that were going on here. It says Epiphanes suddenly launched a fierce attack on the city. I'm reading around 1 Maccabees 1, starting in verse 30. So he attacks Jerusalem and he deals a major blow, killing many of the people. He plundered the city, he set it on fire, and tore down its buildings and walls. He and his army took the women and children as prisoners and seized all the cattle. Then Antiochus and his forces built high walls and strong towers in the area north of the temple. He turned it into a fort, and they brought in a group of traitorous Jews and installed them there. They also brought in arms and supplies, and he stored in the fort all the loot that they had taken in Jerusalem. And the fort became a great threat to the city. And the fort was a threat to the temple. And it was a constant evil menace for Israel. Innocent people were murdered around the altar. The holy place was defiled by murderers. And in verse 38, the people of Jerusalem fled in fear, and the city became a colony of foreigners. Jerusalem was foreign to its own people who had been forced to abandon the city. Can you imagine this happening in your hometown, in America, if you're listening here in America, or any other city in the world? Put yourself in the place of what's going on here. In verse 39, it says, her temple was as empty as a wilderness. Her festivals were turned into days of mourning. Her Sabbath joy into shame. Her honor became an object of ridicule. Her shame was as great as her former glory, and her pride was turned into deepest mourning. Antiochus now issued a decree that all nations in his empire should abandon their own customs and become one people. Haven't we heard this before? All the Gentiles and even many of the Israelites submitted to this decree, and they adopted the official pagan religion, offered sacrifices to idols, and no longer observed the Sabbath. This is all written in the book of Maccabees. The king also sent messengers with a decree to Jerusalem and all the towns of Judea. ordering the people to follow customs that were foreign to the country. He ordered them not to offer burnt offerings, grain offerings, or wine offerings in the temple, and he commanded them to treat Sabbath and festivals as ordinary work days. They were even ordered to defile the temple and the holy things in it. They were commanded to build pagan altars, temples, and shrines, and to sacrifice pigs and other unclean animals there. They were forbidden to circumcise their sons and were required to make themselves ritually unclean in every way they could, so that they, now listen to this, why? So that they would forget the law which the Lord had given through Moses and would disobey all its commands. The penalty for disobeying the king's decree was death. Now put yourself in their place. How could you stand living during this time and keep your faith? And continuing on, it says, on the 15th day of the month of Kislev, this is around December time, in the year 145, King Antiochus sent up the awful horror on the altar of the temple, and pagan altars were built in the towns throughout Judea. Pagan sacrifices were offered in front of houses and in the streets. Any books of the law which were found, Bibles, Torah scrolls, they didn't have written books like we have, but they had Torah scrolls. Any books of the law that were found were torn up and burned. Do we know anyone else who burned Bibles during his day? And anyone who was caught with a copy of the sacred books who obeyed the law was put to death by order of the king. And month after month, these wicked people used their power against the Israelites caught in the towns. And then on the 25th day of the month, these same evil people offered sacrifices on the pagan altar erected on top of the altar in the temple. Mothers who had allowed their babies to be circumcised were put to death in accordance with the king's decree. Their babies were hung around their necks, and their families and those who had circumcised them were put to death. But many people in Israel firmly resisted the king's decree, and they refused to eat food that was ritually unclean, and they preferred to die rather than break the holy covenant and eat unclean food, and many did die. And when Antiochus offered a swine on the temple altar and dedicated it to the god of Zeus on that day, I'm paraphrasing here now, that was the abomination of desolation spoken of in the book of Daniel and repeated again by Jesus himself, that this day would happen again during these end times. This is why, my friends, biblical history is so vitally important to understand. Yes, it was a very, very dark time. It was the Holocaust of its day. But then in 174 to 135 BC, the Maccabean revolt started. And even some of the Romans helped during this time. And they were starting to rise to power, the Romans. And the temple eventually was retaken. It was cleansed. It was rededicated. And it's celebrated today as the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, the festival of lights, called also the Feast of Rededication. During the season of Hanukkah in December, we will visit this topic again. But for now, our time for this segment's almost over. I wanted to go through this history with you. So ponder these words until tomorrow that I've shared with you today. And always feel free to email us and visit our website at mymdi.org. Share this message on your social networks. And we cherish you being here with us. And if the Lord puts it upon your heart, consider supporting us with a monthly offering to help us stay on the air. And until tomorrow, my friends, I just say Shalom Aleichem. Shalom. May the peace of God be with you. God bless. And we'll see you tomorrow.